I am absolutely delighted to welcome this morning Angus Murray, the CIO of Renewables, Thermal and EPM at SSE. And the reason why I'm delighted is because Angus is actually helping us move towards net zero as a country, whilst also helping with our economic situation. So, very timely conversation with COP happening this week and all the focus on the cost of living crisis. Angus has had over 20 years in the oil and gas industry and has an engineering background before starting his PhD in artificial intelligence. So I think we can all agree that he's an incredibly intelligent man and the kind of person we want on the job to take us to net zero and create a new energy grid. So without further ado, I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Angus for his talk this morning.
Yeah, a bit of a full house, and I'm hoping you're not here to either throw tomatoes at me for the price of your energy, because I can't help you there, or looking to reduce the cost of your energy, which we're trying to do, but I can't also help you there. So, I think it's probably a timely presentation. We've got COP27 on, but then also everybody's feeling the energy crisis at the moment. Everybody's hearing about energy transition. I just find myself quite often in conversations realising how little people actually understand what's going on and what is happening. And a lot is happening, and it's a really exciting industry. So, as I said, I've been in SSE two years. Before that, I had 20 odd years in oil and gas. So I've sort of been making my own energy transition from oil and gas, as are probably about 20 to 30% of our new recruits are coming from high carbon industries. So, and we are hiring at about 1,000 people at least a year, so it's growing quite fast. I'll explain SSE, but we're about 10,000 plus staff and growing, energy company providing generation and distribution of electricity and a bunch of other things. So just thought I'd try and give a sort of introduction to try and explain a wee bit about the energy mix. How does our energy get to our doors? How is the industry set up at the moment, and use SSE as a way of explaining that. Explain the transition. A lot of the technologies are driving the transition away from high carbon and looking at how we can get net zero and the key role that digital is taking in that. So I think probably to start, it's like how is our energy, I forgot about my mic. How is the energy mix working? So in SSE and generally, you've got all our generation. So in SSE, we're a large provider of offshore wind farms. So we develop them and install and operate large-scale wind farms onshore and offshore. SSE's heritage actually comes from hydro. So SSE was originally Scottish Hydroelectric with Southern Electric, which is down in the south of England, that merged together. But some of our hydro stations were built in the 30s and the 40s. And we've got about 200 sites of hydro, and we've got a number of large wind farms. So a big part of SSE's business is generating electricity. Another part is our power stations. So we still have power stations. So these are becoming increasingly important. So while we're increasing the amount of renewables being delivered, we need to manage the intermittency. So when there's not wind, we need flexible generation to come on and meet the demands of the grid. And so we've got probably about 10 or a dozen power stations. Peterhead, closest one here, Peterhead Power Station, which I was at on Monday, and providing, and these are all gas-fired power stations with a decent-sized business also doing gas storage, so gas storage to trade in the market. So we've got our generators, and SSE is in these areas, and then and we've also now developing solar, battery, other parts. So the energy mix in the UK is largely this, with nuclear, and then interconnectors to Europe, where we'll import and export electricity across on the European markets. So just to sort of, might not mean a lot to a lot of people, but offshore wind farm, we're about 2 gigawatts producing. So how much we can actually produce at any one time. We've got 1 gigawatt currently being developed in construction, and a lot more planned. We're going to almost go 5 times the amount. We've got about 600 megawatts of onshore wind, and we've also got some large-scale projects increasing on that, in the main ones in Shetland, but also around Europe. And we've got about 1.5 gigawatts of hydro storage, and hydro's something that is becoming more important as it's a really good. So hydro, there's 2 real main types of hydro. You've got inline, so if you imagine a river, you've dammed it at points, and as the water comes through, you generate electricity. The other kind is pumped storage, where you have 2 locks above and below. When you need, you let the water out, and so that being able to put on high demand of electricity very quickly really helps National Grid meet the fluctuations in the energy demand and distribution. And then another thing about hydro, which is becoming more and more important, is it's effectively a natural battery. So during the evening, when we're generating too much wind and there's not enough demand, you can use that. You can take some of that electricity and pump the water back up to the top block, and then use that effectively as a natural battery to make up the grid. So another big part of SSE's business, which is then the transmission, so how you actually move the electricity, it tends to be that most of these things are not in places anybody else wants to be, so we need to get the electricity from those locations to main areas of population. So we've got a big transmission business, so it runs most of the high voltage transmission lines across the whole of Scotland, and some down south. And that is becoming a key area as well. The investment in transmission is huge, because as you bring in more remote wind farms, you need to get those large sources of electricity to the population areas, and so big transmission programs, high voltage DC, which are a way of really reducing transmission losses, is a big part of the business in SSE. And then the final part is distribution, where it now comes to substations and comes out to houses and businesses, and how that's managed, how that is making sure that distribution can handle the demands that are coming to it. And so this is SSE's business. We're in sort of 7 key divisions. There are some other businesses here that are smaller but are getting bigger. So we've got businesses producing solar farms. We've also got looking at a lot more battery farms. So again, this is back to this whole thing of how do you actually meet the demand when we have intermittency. So when wind or solar drops, how do you meet that? So batteries, hydrogen, and other technologies. So SSE, in my world, I look after the IT for a renewables business, which makes up onshore, offshore, wind and hydro. I also look after thermal, which are power stations, which is also a really nice, interesting area of how you actually move those power stations to net zero, which is a combination of things like carbon capture and trying to look at what hydrogen can do. And the other bit that's missing from here that I look after is EPM, which is our energy trading business, because at the end of the day, all of this has to actually work across markets. So how we actually sell our generation onto the market, how we forward sell, how we trade it on a daily basis, how do we peak demands. The actual trading of electricity is a business in its own right. It's a big business. And so how we actually manage to take all that electricity and pass it out. The bit that's missing there is SSE used to have a retail business. And this is probably going to be this is why the SSE Hydro is now called the SSE, or the OVO Hydro, if anybody's been there lately. So the retail was basically companies that take that electricity, buy it off the generating market, and create products for you to buy at home. They work out what you might need as far as flexible tariffs, green energy, whatever. And so SSE used to do the retail business. That was sold a few years ago. We don't do that now, so we basically generate and distribute electricity and looking at how we make that a net zero business. So really at the heart of everything that SSE is doing right now is the 2030 net zero plan, which is a big part of how we transform this grid. Just to give you a sort of idea of some of those changes. So one of our wind farms that we're currently building, Dogger Bank, is going to be the largest wind farm in the world. And it just, I don't think anybody can quite, the London Eye on the left there, the area of the circle of the London Eye compared to the area of the circle of one Dogger Bank, it's 4 times the area of one turbine sweep. So, and we're going to have 300 of them in the middle of the North Sea. So we've already put in about 95, or the foundations are in. It's about 125 kilometres offshore. So huge infrastructure projects that are going in. So that's one. Once that goes live, that'll be the largest offshore wind farm in the whole world. You might also see, so on the train today, up around Montrose Coast, we've got Seagreen, which is another huge offshore wind farm. That's going to be the deepest offshore wind farm in the world. And so when that comes in, that's already starting to produce. And then we've got another big wind farm planned is Berwick Bank off the North Berwick, and not far from here. But just the scale of these, the turbines are getting bigger and bigger, and so being able to industrialise wind at this sort of level really helps us move in the right direction. And another part is everybody keeps, well, what if the wind doesn't blow? And so how you actually take your flexible fleet and make them as green as possible. So we're just going live in a few months with Kedbe, which is our newest power station, so that they expect that to be the highest efficiency gas turbine power station in Europe. When it goes live, that's what they're hoping on all the calculations right now. So this is part of the transition. How do we actually clean up the fleet, and then how do we start looking at projects to take the carbon away? So if you look at Peterhead, we've got a big project there with Equinor, which is to take the carbon from the gas turbine power station and pump out to an old gas reservoir from oil and gas, and then pump the CO2 into the ground and let it sort of secrete into the rock. And so those are the kinds of things around power stations. There's a lot of work there in thermal of either capturing the carbon, putting it underground, improving the efficiency, and then the other big area around power stations, what is the role hydrogen is going to play. So a lot of people have heard hydrogen, but obviously the good thing about hydrogen is when you burn it, it's just you get water, so there's no fumes. So if we can use something in hydrogen, then that's going to play a big part of being able to create hydrogen when we've got plenty of wind and use it as a feedstock. But that's another area I'll talk about. And then as all these big projects are coming on, the transmission is huge. I've found out I've got a few SSE transmission colleagues in the room. Transmission alone is just this massive amount of investment going on. How to create the transmission lines around the UK to bring all this renewables to the area. So SSE is leading in HVDC, which is a way of transmitting electricity with really high voltage DC, direct current, and then you reduce the losses of that transmission. But where, for example, there's a new HVDC being laid between Shetland to the UK, which then means we've got a large onshore wind farm currently being built in Shetland, Viking, and so that will also then come back to the UK. Shetland will be able to become an exporter of electricity. So these are the kinds of projects that are making a huge difference. And then Cora Glass, which is the first new hydro project in about, I can't remember, it's 30 or 40 years. This is pumped storage, so the idea being we've got 2 lochs somewhere around Loch Ness. We'll take those, it'll be about 1,500, 1.5 gigawatts of power on demand, and being able to store 30 gigawatt hours, which is a significant amount of energy. So in the case where you start losing wind, or you've not have solar, you can then be bringing on the hydro to actually make up the shortfall. And so Cora Glass is one of the first hydro stations, I say, that's been built in a long time, and it's going through its design at the moment. So I think what that shows is that the scale, it's difficult to actually comprehend the scale. I think at SSE, I keep saying it feels like every single business we've got has just been turned up to 11, because it's about creating more wind farms at a huge scale that have never been seen. It's changing our flexible fleet so that they're net zero, but they're available to meet shortfall and be flexible, but then also bringing in a lot of new solutions. We've got a lot of projects around batteries and other technologies, hydrogen. So there's a real massive change going on and huge scale of projects. I was probably a bit fortunate yesterday at about 10 o'clock. I just had a quick look on GridWatch to see this is the kind of geeky things you now do if you're in renewables, and what the generation was in the UK. So the demand, and it tells an interesting picture, and I was probably quite fortunate that the amount of renewables generating at the moment, but it gives you an idea that the demand during the day there was like about 35 gigawatts across the country. But over half of that was getting actually provided by renewables. Quite a big bit there still around nuclear. Nuclear is a big question for a lot of people as to how, nuclear is not an easy thing to develop, and you can't just whip up new stations very quickly. So it is there as a technology, and then what you see at the bottom is another big part of when we talk about our energy trading business. Our interconnectors, so France, Netherlands, basically these EU interconnectors that allow us to transmit power to the continent and also buy power. So a big part of our trading business is just we're also trading energy with Europe to try and just balance the grid. So it's definitely a better picture. We're definitely leading a lot of way, but it's how we take that CCGT, so that's combined cycle gas turbines, and reduce that or move that to more a net zero solution. So it's definitely moving in the right direction. Just sort of future technologies and challenges, I mentioned some of them. So I say hydrogen is something that's been talked about a lot. For those that don't know, you can take hydrogen. The main thing you can do with hydrogen is you take electricity, you do electrolysis and water, and you get hydrogen, you get oxygen. You burn hydrogen, it just turns back to water. So it sounds like the wonder fuel. So a lot of people, if we've got lots of spare wind, could we use hydrogen as a way of taking that spare wind, generating hydrogen, store it, and then at a point when there's not as much wind or solar, you use that hydrogen to generate electricity. The bit that's there's a lot of challenges with hydrogen that people don't necessarily talk about. So it's very, very small, so it tends to leak out a lot of the containers and pipework that you normally have. It hates metal, it corrodes metal, it's highly explosive. There's just challenges, but then as an actual feedstock and as a clean energy, it's a big area of interest for a lot of people. And then that also ties into storage. Do we store hydrogen? How do we store it? Floating wind, so as we've, I think it's something like the UK offshore has something like 40% of Europe's wind. So it's a lot of interest in how we just get more and more seabed. And then as you start going deeper, it becomes more difficult. And so the economics of having really deep foundations aren't there. And so the next big thing has been selling licenses for floating wind. So how do you actually create floating wind farms that then produce electricity and give you that? So floating wind, the Scottish government did a big licensing round, and there's a lot going on around floating wind as another way of doing it. And carbon capture. So there's some technologies that are just going to be so difficult to transition away from carbon, and so how do you take those areas and move them into carbon capture? And then as part of the transition as well, carbon capture can provide a way like that with our existing gas turbine fleet, bringing that forward. Electric car deployment, I think a lot of people, that's the one that's quite funny. We've got electric cars, and it's definitely one that's missold by a lot of people. But how we deploy that, how we make sure the infrastructure is there for charging, how we make sure the network's capable of taking all that power, making sure that we can move across. And one of the interesting projects I saw was in our distribution fleet, how they're predicting the network demand for chargers, home chargers, electric heat pumps, and trying to see where on the grid there might be tensions. We need to upgrade the grid to cope with that. So that's an example of something else that's going on. Vehicle to grid, something that's not far off, which is basically if you have got a big car and you've got a big huge battery and it's sitting on your drive, then why not use the battery to charge your house or generate to your house and use that electricity during peak demand moments. And so vehicle to grid, some cars already do that, and it's just a question of how that happens next. Obviously there's challenges around world politics. The biggest thing that's happened is the reliance on gas, and then with Russia, that's been a major thing for us. And the role of pump storage, as I say, Clara Glass is a big project, but we've got a couple of pump storage facilities which play a really important role also for National Grid to, if they've got spikes in the electricity, they can basically offload it by pumping the water up the hill, so they get rid of overloads in the system. And then a big thing we're involved in is around hydrogen clusters. So that's another idea of where you take. So you could be generating, you have electricity coming from wind, you generate hydrogen, you then distribute that hydrogen to various businesses that need energy, and you also take their carbon and you carbon capture. So how you actually, we've got a big project in Teesside around that. As I said, how we transmit is a big thing. So there's a whole lot there, and I think at the end of the day, one thing that's really interesting is there's no point in doing all this unless it's sustainable. So there's a huge focus in SSE around our sustainability, and a lot of what SSE's investment is about is by everything being sustainable and doing, there's a great quote about making profit by doing good things and making the planet better. And so that's at the heart of what SSE does. And part of that is a just transition. And so what is key with all this is not to kill off industries, kill off communities that are relying on certain technologies. It's how you actually make a much bigger, healthier switch of jobs moving, people moving careers, and trying to transition to, so you don't want us to fix one thing and create a lot of hardship for other people. So that's a big part. So yeah, plenty going on there. I thought this was actually, quite a useful little metaphor, personal journey. So we got an electric car, then we decided this is great, so we got a second electric car, which if anybody's got an electric car, yeah, I think most people enjoy it. It's good fun. And we were charging it off our house, managed to get onto smart grid. So basically our smart meter meant that at one point our price got changed every half hour, and the car could then charge up based on what the network was. So I think this is just to illustrate how much technology is already there. So you can have an Agile tariff that changes every half hour depending on what's going on in the network, and your car can just start charging on that. Then went the next step and just put in solar. So got solar installed, and this was yesterday at the same time. So my house was generating in winter about 1.8 kilowatts of solar. It was putting quite a lot of it to the battery. So our house was only using about 600 watts, and at the same time it was charging up our battery. So we had a big battery there, and what it then meant was as soon as the solar dropped, the battery kicks in and starts feeding the house. So these are technologies that are in people's houses. So this is, we're off-peak charging for car and the house battery. So if you don't think there's going to be a lot of solar tomorrow, you can charge up the battery on cheap rate. Cheap rate is because there's a lot of wind at night when people aren't using demand, so you've got good green electricity going in at a much cheaper rate. If you've charged the battery and used everything else, you can export to the grid, which will become a bigger thing. People micro-export from across the network. Solar divert, so you can set up so that once the battery's full, and if you've still got spare, let's start heating up my hot water immersion. So rather than putting my gas boiler on, let's start doing heating up the hot water. If we want, and there's a power cut, the battery can kick in and the house gets powered by the battery. And you've got incentivized tariffs. So like that, they're wanting you to use more of the electricity at night. So this is about how you get tariffs to drive demand. So if you know that you can get, like quite a while ago before the energy crisis, you used to get Agile tariff, and at one point they would send you an email saying it's going to go negative tonight, so you're going to get paid for taking electricity off the grid. And I've got a rather sad friend who sat up till about 4 in the morning with 2 pyrolytic ovens on, cleaning. He had his car charging. I think he was pulling 100 amps or something. So there is a whole world there, but incentivized tariffs is just a simple way of, well, it's going to be cheaper for you. So Octopus just advertised now that they're going to start paying people to change the way they use their electricity. So if you're not using it at peak times, they'll give you a rebate. So those are things that drive behaviours, because it's in, and this means that our energy bill's gone to next to nothing because of this. Solar predictors, so technology, that's just something you can get for free. It's just a AI model looking at the weather, working out how much solar it thinks you're going to have tomorrow. And based on that, if it doesn't think you're going to have much solar, it's going to charge your battery up during the night on the low rate, so that then during the day it will use your battery power that was charged up on low rate costs. So these are just all things that are in there. The latest thing now is also Agile tariffs. So that battery can now connect to your electricity company, and you can do an Agile. So you add on to the grid as a storage provider for them. So they will, if the price goes down, they'll charge up your battery, and if the price goes up, you'll sell electricity back to them onto the grid. So these are just, it's I think, a great illustration of how the technology is already there. And that's one of the big reasons that everybody got smart meters. I would give a wee tip. We're not a call at all related, but Home Energy Scotland, if you go on that website, you can get an interest-free loan to do all of this from the government over about 12 years. So it's worth having a look into. They only do it in Scotland, not in England, but you can get all of that paid for with a loan. It's interest-free, and then the net price is probably lower than your electricity bill. So, but yeah, I think even at this home level, what you then see is this system is balance and intermittency. So solar will drop and come back. The battery is using the spare solar to charge up, and we're using that battery at times of low solar. So storage is playing a key part, and this is the same as the energy grid across our network. Prediction analytics is a big thing. How do you predict the weather coming forward? And that is an even bigger thing when we come into wind, when we come into that intermittency, trying to predict the weather that's coming and the demand that's coming. Spill and excess energy. So if my battery's full, and if I put that electricity to heat up my immersion in my hot water, then I'm just using that for nothing, and I'm not using my boiler. So spilling electricity is another big thing. That's where hydro's coming in, where they can take spare electricity and put it into pump storage as well. And then intelligent tariffs, it's how you do that. It's as important on how this all works commercially as anything else. And so incentivizing people through smart tariffs, through changing the way they behave because it's in their interest, then that's going to really help us. So I just think that's a sort of useful way of where we're going. For us, so we've got lots of lovely pictures because I had the pleasure of going and visiting a few of our sites, and you're just driving around Loch Lomond, which is pretty beautiful. But so for us, technologies are making an impact everywhere. I think you mentioned I did AI about 30 years ago, and it was just so difficult. And now you're just seeing that AI and predictive analytics are just little blobs in a cloud service, and so how useful that is now to actually create predictors. So AI and predictive analytics has just been huge across our industry. You're looking at big things, trying to predict weather patterns, even down to trying to predict weather for then how much energy your power station is going to be able to produce based on the pressures and temperatures, so then put that on the grid, trying to predict rainfall and how much rain is going to come down into the hydro station, the hydro catchment area. So AI and predictive and analytics are just right through everything that we're doing right now, from, as I say, trying to predict where the network's going to have shortfalls for people, where you're expecting big areas that people are going to buy more EVs and want to charge more and things like that. And then that becomes an even bigger thing when we're into energy market trading and optimization. The energy system is becoming a lot more dynamic. So like that, you have just got these big sweeps between wind going over into gas markets. And so a lot of where we're working on analytics and trading and algorithmic trading, it's a big part of the technology that's driving this. Then for a lot of our business, we are still asset management. So we've got physical assets that need to perform and produce at the right time. And so we've got a lot of work going on. Coming from oil and gas, it's been interesting to see how much is transferable from just another sort of asset-intensive business. So digital twins, how do you actually, have good models of what that power station is going to do, or how that wind is going to perform, what we think the weather is doing across the weather patterns. So it might hit one wind farm, it might not hit others. Trying to predict demand, trying to understand where we're going to have shortfalls, and do we bring power stations up, or do we have hydro? When do we run hydro, or when do we hold off and wait until the next part? So predictive analytics and how we optimize that's a big thing. So those digital twins of understanding our assets better and understanding how we work it. Mobile workers is a big thing for us. So obviously we've got a huge fleet of people. If I just look at the generating assets, in renewables, we've got people going across all kinds of, a couple of hundred dams and hydro sites across Scotland. So handheld, being able to give people everything that they need in their hands, been a big thing for us, and it continues to be. Predictive maintenance, just how we can get better at maintaining our fleet, how we can predict. That's not just for asset, utilization. That's the last thing we want is at the point where there's a super peak. So by super peaks, we mean there's a massive drop in wind and a pickup in demand. We want to know that at that point, if we need to bring in our flexible generation really quickly, that it's going to be working. And so a lot of work's been going on around predictive maintenance and how we get there. And obviously cloud services and digital, what is digital, but we've got a huge program across every single one of our businesses looking at digital. And so that's been a massive thing for us. And for us, that means where we've got technologies that can totally change the way we operate. So looking at, rather than it becoming starting as an IT project, just more where we've got specific problems and we're not having to actually think of all the things we used to do on an IT project we can deploy quickly. But a big thing for us and for me personally has been around organising for success. I've got a couple of slides on this. So one of the things the SSE did was they just went, right, we're not actually going fast enough. So they started this programme, Net Zero Acceleration Plan, which is, I think it's 30 billion investment up to 2030 to get to net zero. So huge investment. I think it's something like £5 or £7 million a day investment or something. So what we looked at was our delivery. So our delivery in renewables and thermal and EPM was very traditional. We'd had large retail projects. We had centralised model, big BUIT teams, but we had strong governance culture, and we were really set up for really big projects. And so what we actually found was that wasn't actually going to do it, because the speed that we needed to move at. And so for the last year or two, a big focus for us has been how we actually, away from all the technology, it's how we change the engine to actually make us deliver these technologies. And so what we have been doing is really looking at deploying Agile across our organisation, which I think there's a wee bit of interesting difference here, because I think what we've really found is a lot of it is around, Agile has been around software development and traditional dev support, where you're maybe focused around one product or a software line. Often focused on limited product sets and lots of developers, so it totally fits there. But for us, when we've got an asset-based business, we're more focused around a bunch of systems that we're bringing best of breed off the, whether it's maintenance management or predictive analytics. We're more concerned with configuration, customization of systems. And so we have a large number of products under our support and that we're trying to change. But what we need to do is move faster, and we need to be able to deliver faster. And we're always changing out systems. And so a big part of what we've done is moved around, what we keep saying, delivering value at pace, moved around value streams. So what we've done is taken our whole organisation of IT and split into these value streams. clear product. The owners from the business, they decide the priority. We are focused around key business areas of process. So you'll say something like asset work optimization, different areas like that, and it then includes a bunch of systems. But what we then have is systems developed and supported within those teams. We embed our key suppliers into those teams. We drive all the prioritization by value, and they do all DevOpsSec within that value stream. And so that is really about how we change our delivery engine to meet the ambition. And so what we have is multiple streams. So we've got sort of asset and work optimization, asset information, operational technology, controlling our assets, so all our control rooms. We've got super peaks, we've got digital, we've got various of these streams, and they are self-contained teams that have as many of the technical people involved. They look after multiple products, but the main thing is they're running 2-week sprints and they're starting to deliver. And I think that, for me, away from all the technology, it's been as important, if not more important, to change the engine that helps us deliver at the speed that we need to deliver. So yeah, I think we're running out of time here, but just finally, I think hopefully I've got over the scale of the thing that we're working on, but I think also the excitement. You know, as I say, we're hiring about 1,000 plus a year, and it's just it's really needing a lot of new minds, a lot of new thinking to come into it. There's technologies playing a massive role in that, whether it's the technology of the turbines, the technology of the blades to make them recyclable. But for IT and digital, it's seen as a massive part as to how we develop these fields quicker, how we bring them on quicker, how we deliver them to optimal power, and then how we meet the net zero agenda. And so, yeah, a wee bit of a plug. We are hiring a lot of people, so if anybody wants to have a look on careers.sse.com, I think you'll find, keep an eye on that if you're interested. So,
okay,
thank
lovely.
you.
Thank you very much, Angus. So we do have a couple of minutes for a couple of quick questions. Has anyone got a quick question? We've got quite a few here. So can I get a microphone? Just go to this gentleman first because you're closest, and then we'll come to you second.
Many thanks for the talk there, Angus. It's interesting what you mentioned, to cover the times when the wind doesn't blow and provide your base load. You're still burning gas and doing the carbon capture thing and efficiency, this sort of stuff. I mean, we're an island, and tidal, you would have thought, is very predictable, constant, there pretty much all the time. Are there economic or technological reasons why we're still burning a fossil fuel and doing the carbon capture thing rather than going a completely different route like tidal?
Yeah, tidal's a funny one. Well, there's tidal and wave, and they just don't seem to have managed to take off. I think there's a number of things. The technology, you've had quite a lot that have just ended up getting swept away in some bad weather, and it does amaze me, coming from oil and gas, that it's not more sort of readily available. But I think just the production of it on scale, tied into the economics and the risk, just makes it difficult. There's companies trying it, and it should have. If you look at the tidal energy around the UK, especially the north of Scotland, it's huge. But then some of the projects that happened up Orkney, that was part of the problem. It was difficult to predict or to manage it in that. But there are projects going on in that. I just think when you look at the scale you need to do there, like Dogger Bank, 300 enormous wind turbines, but that's taken a good number of years to get through consent and get, our Viking wind farm in Shetland that's just getting built right now, that's going to be the most productive wind farm, for the energy that's going to get from the wind in Shetland. But that's been in plan for 16 years. So I think we get a lot of issues around consents and planning, but regardless, the technology is now developed to the point that it is getting better and better, and people have taken that because it was easier onshore, which then developed the technologies, and so I think it just needs, I think they just don't seem to have managed to find an economic way of making it viable. But yeah, I think, and so being able to develop big, huge wind farms is
So there we go. If anyone's got a solution to that, do please come along and speak to Angus afterwards. And
But solar is actually, solar farms as well is another, they're getting more and more solar farms in the UK, which seems, you wouldn't have imagined, but yeah, there is actually a lot more solar than you think that can generate. So.
And then we had a question at the front here.
One was the same question.
Oh, it's the same question. Well, there we go. Oh, we've got one gentleman at the back here, then who can step in.
Yeah, hi, thanks very much. I just wanted to check, obviously, technology is playing a key role in the transition. But in terms of like offshore energy, how resilient, operationally resilient are they? You know, for example, cyber attack offshore, you know, should we worry, or is there pretty much nothing to worry about?
Well, no, everybody's worried about that. So we come under NIST with the national infrastructure. So we've got Ofgem, we meet Ofgem, we get audited. So yeah, that's why there's two streams there for operational technology. So we're always doing a lot of projects on our OT estate and how we actually upgrade that and how we keep ahead. So yeah, I think there's a huge focus on that, and even more now with the sort of political situation. So yeah, we get a lot of scrutiny from the likes of Ofgem, and the new NIST guidelines are you know, we're always having to trump. So for example, NIST before just covered all operational technology. For us, they've now widened it out to supporting technologies, so like our maintenance management systems that could impact production, so it becomes a national infrastructure issue. So yeah, I don't think anybody would stand up and say, no, there's nothing we've got to worry about. We're all worried about it. It's probably one of the biggest things you're worrying about, and all you can do is try and mitigate the risk and have lots of programs in place, which cat and mouse.
Absolutely. Lovely. Thank you, Angus. And join me for one last round of applause for Angus.